Jack Donovan wasn't expecting anything but peace when he turned the key to his front door. 2 weeks away in Indiana to help his mother recover from hip surgery had been exhausting enough. All he wanted was a quiet evening, a hot shower, and maybe a cold beer on his back porch. But before he even stepped inside, his stomach sank out there. Stapled dead center on his front door was a large orange notice. The font was large, angry, and officio-looking. It read property abandonment, seizure in process, HOA enforcement protocol 3-17. Jack stared at it, blinked, then checked the date. Just 2 days ago he pulled it down and stepped into his house. The place looked untouched. Lights worked, heat was still on, fridge humming. His dog's food bowl in the kitchen still had kibble from the automatic feeder. Nothing about the place screamed abandoned. It looked like what it was, a home. But someone had decided to make a move. While he was gone, Jack set the paper on the counter and called his neighbor Harold, a retired firefighter who lived across the street and had agreed to keep an eye on the house. "Yeah, I saw someone from the HOA snooping around 2 days ago," Harold said. Lorraine Prescott was with them. They looked real serious. Clipboard, photos, the works. Jack's jaw clenched. Lorraine Prescott. She'd been the HOA president for the last 3 years. And somehow, in that time, had managed to become judge, jury, and executioner for the whole neighborhood. She once fined a single mom for putting up a swing set without permission. Another neighbor got penalized for having too many solar lights. And now, apparently, Lorraine had decided Jack had abandoned his home. He hadn't missed a mortgage payment. Taxes were current. His mail was paused and resumed on time. There was no reason to think he was gone for good, unless someone wanted to believe that on purpose. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the street. It was quiet. Too quiet. He knew how the HOA worked. If they tagged a property as abandoned, they could begin proceedings to reclaim it under certain bylaws. Then they'd auction it, maybe resell it. It sounded ridiculous, but in this neighborhood, with Lorraine in charge, anything was possible. Jack picked up the notice again and read the fine print. It referenced obscure HOA enforcement codes and directed him to attend a hearing to explain his absence next Friday. If he failed to attend, the matter would be resolved by the board without further input. That hearing was less than 5 days away. He opened his laptop and began reading through the HOA's bylaws. They were dense, full of vague language, and overlapping rules. But Jack wasn't the kind of guy to back down. Not when his home was on the line. The more he read, the more he realized the language of the bylaws wasn't just confusing, it was designed to be vague enough to justify anything, strict enough to punish anyone, and broad enough to be used however Lorraine wanted. He poured a drink, sat back in his chair, and considered his next move. He could just show up to the hearing and argue his case. But something about this didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt calculated. He needed to be ready, and not just for the hearing, for whatever Lorraine Prescott had planned next. He made one phone call before bed. It was to Mitchell Grant, an old college roommate turned real estate attorney who owed him more than a few favors. Jack explained the situation quickly. Mitchell's response was dry but honest. "If what you're saying is true, Jack, they're not just violating their own rules. They're trying to steal your house." Jack looked back at the orange paper. "They're going to find out I'm not so easy to steal from." And just like that, the fight had begun. Jack didn't sleep much that night. He kept the porch light on and his phone fully charged. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. He'd seen how HOA leadership had slowly changed since Lorraine Prescott took over. What started as friendly reminders about grass length and mailbox color turned into citations, threats, and unexplained property seizures. By morning, he was ready for a face-to-face. He didn't have to wait long. At exactly 9:07 a.m., a white Lexus SUV eased up the driveway. Lorraine stepped out, clipboard in hand, her oversized sunglasses perched like a mask. She walked like she owned the street, heels clicking sharply on Jack's concrete. He opened the door before she could knock. "Well, you're back," she said with a practiced smile. "We were under the impression you'd vacated." "I was in Indiana taking care of my mom," Jack replied. "Flat, didn't know that counted as abandoning my house." She flipped a page on her clipboard, pretending to search for details she already knew. "Well, it's unfortunate, but we had several complaints. Your lawn wasn't mowed. Packages were left out. No visible movement. We take community security seriously." "Funny," Jack said. "Harold across the street saw you trespass on my property with 2 board members and take pictures through my windows." Lorraine didn't flinch. "Due diligence." Jack leaned forward, just slightly. "You didn't notify me. You didn't call. You slapped a notice on my door with a deadline and hoped I wouldn't show up." There was a pause, just long enough for the smile to fade behind her sunglasses. "Well," she said finally, "you'll have the opportunity to speak at Friday's hearing. If the board agrees, you've violated abandonment codes. The transfer process will begin." "Transfer? To who?" Jack asked. "You already have a buyer." Lorraine didn't answer. She just turned and walked back toward her Lexus. Her silence told Jack more than words ever could. The second she left, Jack jumped into action. He texted Mitchell, "You were right. This isn't enforcement, it's theft." Mitchell replied almost Instantly. Then we hit back harder. I'll start digging into who's benefited from past transfers. Jack knew time was running out. If Lorraine had her paperwork lined up, she could sway the board before he ever got a word in. He needed something better than emotion. He needed undeniable evidence. So he started with a name, Mrs. Harper. He remembered the story well. An elderly widow who'd quietly left the neighborhood a year earlier. Rumors swirled. Medical bills, foreclosure, family problems. But Jack always thought something didn't add up. Her house sold fast. Too fast. No open house. No auction. Just gone. Jack drove across town to the senior living facility where he heard she'd moved. He didn't call ahead. He didn't need to. Something told him she'd been waiting for someone to ask. When he arrived, Mrs. Harper was in the courtyard, feeding birds. Her eyes lit up when she recognized him. "I remember you," she said softly. "You're the one who built the redwood deck. Beautiful work." They sat in the shade and talked, and when Jack brought up the HOA, she grew quiet. "They told me I owed $7,000 in dues," she whispered. "Said I'd be taken to court." I panicked. "I didn't know better." "Who told you that?" Jack asked gently. "She said if I signed a quitclaim deed, they'd waive everything and let me leave in peace." Jack's hands clenched. "Did you ever get anything in writing?" She nodded slowly and walked him back to her room. In a drawer was a thin file letters, one of which bore Lorraine's signature. Jack scanned it. His pulse quickened. None of it was legal. Not a single document filed with the county. No attorney signatures, just HOA letterhead and threats wrapped in legal-sounding nonsense. He called Mitchell on the way back. "We have our first victim," he said, "and we have proof." Mitchell whistled. "Lorraine's been flipping properties like pancakes. I'll bet good money she's pocketing kickbacks." Jack smiled for the first time in 24 hours. "Let's stack this file. I want to show up to that hearing with more than just an explanation. I want to drop a bomb." The trap Lorraine had set for him was real, but Jack was already working on something bigger. He wasn't going to just protect his home. He was going to burn her whole scheme to the ground. Jack spent the next 2 days in full-blown recon mode. Every hour mattered. He knew Lorraine's type, people who smiled to your face while filing paperwork behind your back. Her endgame wasn't personal. It was profit. What made it personal? Was that she thought he'd roll over? Mitchell had already uncovered something odd. 3 previous homeowners, all quietly pushed out within the last 2 years, had one thing in common. Lorraine was the one who signed off on each abandonment notice. No second signatures. No meeting records. Just one stamp and silence. Jack didn't want rumors. He wanted receipts. That meant one thing: digging into the HOA's bylaw archive. Problem was, Lorraine had recently restricted access to board members only. But she had made a mistake. She left hard copies in the community clubhouse storage room. Jack remembered it because he'd helped move the filing cabinets in years ago, back when Lorraine was just another neighbor and the board still held barbecues instead of secret hearings. At 10 p.m. that night, Jack entered the clubhouse with Harold standing lookout. The storage room was musty, lit by one flickering bulb. Rows of metal cabinets stretched along the walls. He opened one, coughing from the dust, and began rifling through folders labeled by year. In the 2022 file, he found IP Law 6.2, the one Mitchell mentioned during their first call. It clearly stated that any seizure of property required a full board vote, unanimous signatures, and public notice posted in 3 visible locations for no less than 30 days, none of which had happened. But the real kicker was a more obscure bylaw buried near the bottom, clause 11.7. No member of the HOA board may personally benefit from any transaction resulting in the acquisition or resale of forfeited properties. Jack's hands trembled. Lorraine had violated that clause 3 times, maybe more. If they could link her to profits, it would be game over. He scanned every relevant page and sent them to Mitchell with one line: "Time to apply pressure." But Lorraine must have sensed the walls closing in. The next morning, Jack woke up to find his trash cans emptied across his driveway. Someone had keyed his truck door, and the power in his garage mysteriously shut off. Later that afternoon, a safety inspection team from the HOA showed up unannounced. They didn't even knock. 2 men in yellow vests started walking around the property, writing things on clipboards, photographing gutters and fences. Jack stepped outside. "Didn't know we had inspections today," he said calmly. One man shrugged. "New policy? Random checks for code compliance." Jack smirked. "Where's that in the handbook?" The man looked nervous. "We're just doing our job." "You work for Lorraine." Silence. Then the man muttered, "You should really come to the hearing." And both of them walked off without another word. Jack wasn't scared. He was mad. He called a local reporter he'd met last year during a zoning dispute. Her name was Rachel Kim. She worked the city beat, had a nose for corruption, and loved HOA drama. When he explained what was happening, she didn't even hesitate. "Do you have documents?" she asked. "Dozens, and a whistleblower who's ready to talk." "Then I'm in. Let me bring a camera." That night, they met at Harold's place. Mrs. Harper agreed to speak on record. Soft-spoken and tearful, she told the story of how Lorraine made her feel like a criminal in her own home. Jack watched Rachel's expression change from reporter to human being. "This woman's a predator," she whispered. Rachel promised to air the story Thursday night, just one day before Jack's hearing. It was perfect, but Jack wasn't done. Yet he called one more person, a quiet, meticulous man named Elliot Pace, who once served on the HOA board before Lorraine ousted him. Elliot answered the phone with hesitation, but after a few words from Jack, he agreed to meet. "I know things," Elliot said, "but I need to know you're serious." "Lorraine has friends, powerful ones," Jack replied without pause. "She tried to steal my home. I'm serious enough." The hearing was closing in. Lorraine was tightening the screws, but Jack was about to pull the floor out from under her. Elliot Pace lived in a modest stucco home, tucked behind a row of overgrown hedges at the far end of the neighborhood, out of sight, which was exactly how he liked it. Jack hadn't seen him in months, not since Elliot vanished from the HOA board under vague circumstances, involving creative differences with Lorraine Prescott, but now Jack knew better. Elliot opened the door slowly, only after peeking through 2 different locks. He looked thinner than Jack remembered, a man who had learned to keep his voice low and his curtains closed. "Did anyone see you come in?" Elliot asked, glancing down the street. Jack stepped inside without answering. The living room smelled faintly of coffee and old printer ink. On the table were piles of manila folders, notes scrawled in red ink, and a file marked "Confidential Prescott." "You said you know what she's been doing," Jack began. Elliot nodded and took a seat. "I was treasurer the first year Lorraine, but became president? That's when everything changed. She stopped holding full board votes, started making executive decisions, always citing emergency clauses, but it was all smoke." Jack leaned forward. "What about the money?" "That's the part no one talks about," Elliot said, his voice low. "Each time a property was seized, it was resold, but the payments didn't go through normal HOA accounts. Lorraine set up a shell company, Golden Bell Management. I traced it to her sister-in-law in Nevada." Jack froze. "You have proof?" Elliot slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, anonymous tips, and a chain of transfers that ended at Golden Bell's account. There was even a notarized copy of a deed showing Lorraine's signature as the witness on a forced sale. "She's not just breaking HOA rules," Jack muttered. "She's committing fraud," Elliot sighed. "I tried to expose it last year. She shut me down. Fast. The next week, I had 3 code violations. My mailbox was vandalized. Someone broke my shed lock. She's doing the same to me," Jack said. Elliot stood and pulled out a dusty black box from the cabinet. Inside was a voice recorder and 3 USB drives. "You want to take her down? This is everything I've collected. The emails, the board meeting recordings, the missing vote logs. But if you use this, she won't go down alone. She'll take people with her." Jack didn't hesitate. "Then I'll bring them to." That same night, Rachel Kim aired the first part of her story. The segment opened with Mrs. Harper, voice trembling but eyes steady, recounting how she was pushed out of her home under threats of legal action. It cut to Jack, holding the orange abandonment notice with the neighborhood in the background. The screen then displayed a flowchart of property seizures, all leading back to Lorraine. The phones at City Hall lit up within the hour. Lorraine must have seen the report, because the next morning, Jack woke to something even more unexpected than vandalism. Silence, no new threats, no code citations, not even a passive-aggressive newsletter on his porch. But Jack knew better. She was regrouping. Harold came over mid-morning, carrying a box of donuts and a whisper. "She's been meeting with the other board members in private. No meeting notices, no minutes. She's circling wagons." Jack said. "She's scared," Harold corrected him, "and scared people make dumb moves." Jack loaded all of Elliot's data into a secure folder and sent it to Mitchell, Rachel, and a lawyer from the city's corruption task force. The hearing was less than 24 hours away. Wasn't just going to show up. He was going to show up with an arsenal. Late that evening, Jack walked his dog down the street. The air was calm, but the tension in the neighborhood was building. Lights flickered on behind drawn blinds. Cars slowed as they passed his house. Everyone knew something was coming, they just didn't know how explosive it would be. Jack stared at the community clubhouse in the distance. Tomorrow, he'd walk through those doors. Tomorrow, he'd finally speak, Lorraine thought. She had cornered him, but he was about to pull the rug out from under her entire empire. The community clubhouse had never been so packed. Folding chairs lined the walls. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering. Some held printed copies of the local news article with Jack's face on it. Others held HOA notices of their own, suddenly questioning every fine and letter they'd ever received. Jack entered through the back doors with Mitchell by his side. He carried no folders, no briefcase, just a calm face and a phone in his pocket loaded with the truth. Lorraine Prescott sat at the front of the room, flanked by 3 board members who all avoided direct eye contact with her. She was dressed sharply in navy blue, her signature pearls gleaming under the overhead lights. On the table in front of her, a small nameplate, a bell, and a thick manila envelope she kept one hand on like it might float away. At 7 p.m. sharp, Lorraine struck the bell. The special hearing regarding the alleged abandonment of Lot 33 Mr. Jack Donovan's property is now in session. Her voice was polished, polite, a bit too cheerful. Jack stepped forward and stood behind the microphone. The room quieted. Lorraine smiled. "You may begin," she said sweetly. Jack looked around. Faces from every street stared back to people he'd known for years. People Lorraine had controlled for years. "I didn't abandon my house," he began. "Steady. I was caring for my mother out of state. My mail was paused, my utilities on, and a neighbor watching the place. This seizure notice was placed illegally." Lorraine tilted her head. "It was placed according to the guidelines in our enforcement policies." Jack's eyes didn't waver. "No. According to Bylaw 6.2, the board must unanimously approve any property seizure. There must be a hearing notice posted publicly for 30 days and a certified vote." He turned slightly, nodding at Mitchell, who stepped forward and placed a large binder on the table. "We interviewed every board member," Mitchell said, opening it. 2 weren't even notified of the vote. 1 didn't know a vote had happened at all. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. Lorraine's fingers tensed on her envelope. Jack continued. "And if anyone here thinks this is just about my house, it's not. Lorraine has done this before. At least 3 times. We have testimony, documents, recordings. One homeowner was threatened with fake dues until she signed over her deed." Gasps filled the room. Lorraine finally opened the envelope. "If you're going to throw around accusations," she said tightly, "you better have evidence. Because we do. These are pictures of your overgrown lawn, your overflowing mailbox, and your backyard deck, which, I might add, was never formally approved." Jack's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "You want evidence?" he asked. "Play the tape." He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. From the speakers came Lorraine's own voice. "Recorded from a board meeting 9 months ago. If we clear out the dead lots early, we can list them privately through Golden Bell and not have to deal with auctions. It's faster, cleaner, nobody checks." The room fell silent except for the sound of Lorraine's recorded laughter. Then chaos erupted. One board member stood up and shouted, "You told us there were no recordings." Another woman in the crowd stood up, waving a letter. "You fined me $500 for a dog leash?" Someone else screamed, "What's Golden Bell?" Lorraine tried to gavel the room down, but the bell clattered off the table. She rose quickly. "This hearing is adjourned until proper legal counsel is present. This is harassment." She tried to walk out, but 2 city officials standing near the side door blocked her path. "Lorraine Prescott," one of them asked. "Yes," she snapped. "You're being served with a cease and desist order from the County Housing Commission. An investigation has been launched into HOA misappropriation and fraud. You are not to touch any HOA funds or enforce any regulations until the matter is resolved." Lorraine's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jack stepped back from the mic. His voice never raised. He didn't gloat. He simply turned to the crowd. "You're not powerless. You never were. You were just afraid to push back. That ends tonight." The crowd erupted not in violence, but in applause. He didn't just win the hearing, he cracked Lorraine's grip on the entire neighborhood. Jack thought the worst was behind him after the hearing. The evidence was out. Lorraine had been exposed in front of the entire neighborhood, and with the county stepping in, she was effectively stripped of her power. But snakes don't die easy. They coiled that it started subtle. That same night, someone turned off the water to Jack's home from the curb valve. He had to go outside in the rain with a wrench just to get it back on. Then came the anonymous tip-offs to animal control claims that he was running an illegal dog rescue. A uniformed officer showed up the next morning, confused and apologetic. "No complaints on file until today," the officer said. 3 came in overnight, all from different names. But same number, same phrasing. Jack didn't need a name to know who was behind it. The retaliation wasn't about winning, it was about punishing. Lorraine had lost in the open. Now she was going underground. Mitchell advised caution. "She's still got friends on that board, Jack. Some are scared, others are just as dirty. She'll play the victim now and spin this into harassment. You need to stay clean, stay loud, let the facts speak." Jack agreed, but the community was rattled. People who cheered him at the hearing were suddenly cautious around him. A few stopped waving when he passed. He even overheard someone whisper, "What if Lorraine sues the HOA? What if our dues go up?" The fear she planted still ran deep, so Jack made a move. He printed every document, every quote, every diagram from Elliot's archive. With Harold's help, he went door to door. Not just on his street, all through the neighborhood. Every single house got a copy of the HOA accountability packet. Jack didn't ask people to rally, he just gave them the truth. That truth grew legs. 3 neighbors started circulating a petition for a vote of no confidence in the remaining board members. A few posted about their own shady citations on social media. Others began calling the county commission to demand an interim oversight committee. But while the neighborhood buzzed with rebellion, Lorraine was making her next move. She wasn't just going after Jack, she went after Elliot. 2 days later, Jack found him sitting on the curb in front of his house, head in his hands. His mailbox had been smashed, his fence slashed with a knife, and someone had filed a noise complaint with a forged signature. Elliot was now facing a city citation for operating a construction site after hours. "She's digging up everything," Elliot said quietly. "Emails, records from when I was treasurer. She's trying to find anything to make me the villain. Jack helped him to his feet. You're not alone anymore. But even Jack couldn't predict Lorraine's final play. That evening, an envelope appeared in Jack's mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single photo grainy, taken at night. It showed Jack standing on Lorraine's property. Lying his back was turned, and in his hand, a garden tool. Below the photo, a note in red marker read, "Trespassing is still a crime. Maybe this time you'll learn your place." Jack stared at the image, jaw locked. She was trying to set him up, him as the aggressor. He picked up the phone and called Rachel Kim. "She's starting a smear campaign," he said. "If I disappear or get arrested, document it, publish everything." Rachel's voice was tense. "Send me the photo. We'll put this on the record. But Jack, be careful. She's losing, and people like that don't play fair when the mask comes off." Jack paced his kitchen, the photo still in his hand. Lorraine wanted him off balance, angry, sloppy, but she'd underestimated him again. He'd come this far by playing smart. Now he needed one last move, something final. Something that would not only shut her down, but make sure she could never worm her way back into power again. He opened his laptop and pulled up Elliot's files again. There was something there, something buried, a forgotten signature, a date mishmash, an illegal account, and just like that, he found it. A financial transfer from the HOA's reserve fund directly to Golden Bell Management. Small, almost hidden, but clearly unauthorized. He cross-checked it with the county database. That transfer had never been reported. Jack smiled coldly. He didn't need to fight her anymore. He just had to report her to the right people. And this time, they weren't going to serve her papers. They were going to serve her a warrant. Jack wasn't a lawyer or an investigator. He was just a homeowner who refused to be bullied. But what he held now, 2 lines buried in a quarterly financial statement, had the weight to bring down more than just Lorraine Prescott. It was a transfer of $4,000 from the HOA reserve fund to Golden Bell Management. No explanation, no invoice, no board approval. The transaction was dated just 3 days after the forced sale of Mrs. Harper's home. Jack emailed the document to the County Housing Commission, Mitchell, and Rachel Kim. Within hours, he got a call back not from a secretary, but from the County Fraud Division's lead investigator. "This is the smoking gun," the voice said. "We've been watching Golden Bell since last summer, but we couldn't tie it directly to HOA corruption until now." The investigator asked Jack for one more thing, a quiet handoff of Elliot's full archive of files, including the recordings. "Once we verify," the voice said, "we move in, and we don't just bring paperwork." Jack could feel the momentum turning again, but he also knew Lorraine was at her most dangerous now. She was wounded, paranoid, and desperate. That afternoon, Jack kept an eye on his security cams while organizing files. Harold stopped by with coffee and whispered that Lorraine hadn't been seen in 2 days, but her husband's car had been parked at the clubhouse all morning. "They're shredding documents," Harold said. "I'd bet on it." That night, Jack made one final sweep of Elliot's folders, looking for anything he might have missed. That's when he noticed a name that hadn't registered before, Marlene Gray, a co-signer on one of the seized property filings. A name listed in a few vote tallies, a quiet board member who rarely spoke at meetings. But in one email sent from Lorraine to the rest of the board, Jack saw the line, "Let Marlene handle the internal logs. She knows how to keep it clean." Jack's stomach dropped. Marlene Gray was Mitchell's aunt. He called his attorney friend, voice tight. "Mitchell, did you know your aunt was on Loren's board?" There was silence. Then Mitchell replied, too carefully, "I did. She's not involved in this. She doesn't even agree with Lorraine." Jack paced the room. "She's listed as a co-signer on one of the seizures, and she managed the books. If that's true, she helped cover the money transfers." Mitchell sighed. "Look, I didn't want to bring it up. I thought she was a pawn in this. She's been used by Lorraine for years. But if she's in deeper, she's not a pawn," Jack interrupted. "She was the shield Lorraine used her name to give everything legitimacy." For the first time since this all began, Jack didn't know who to trust. Still, the plan had to move forward. The next morning, county officials entered the HOA clubhouse with warrants. Lorraine wasn't there, but 3 board members were detained for questioning. Files, hard drives, and backup servers were confiscated. Rachel Kim's camera crew arrived 15 minutes later, and that night, the story aired again, this time with names. Golden Bell was exposed as a shell company. Mrs. Harper's interview aired in full. The illegal financial transfers were displayed on screen. The entire community watched as the myth of Lorraine Prescott collapsed live. People cried, some cheered. One neighbor dropped off a pie at Jack's door with a thank you card. But Jack couldn't celebrate just yet. Marlene hadn't been named in the report yet, and Mitchell hadn't returned his last 3 calls. Late that evening, Jack drove to Elliot's house to deliver a hard copy of the case files, just to be safe. Elliot opened the door, looking pale. "There's something else," he said, voice trembling. "It's not just Lorraine. It's how she got onto the board in the first place." He handed Jack a scanned document. It was a voting sheet from 5 years ago. Jack read the signature at the bottom. "Mitchell Grant. She didn't run fairly," Elliot said. The original election was rigged. Your friend, he certified it. Jack staggered back a step. The one person he had trusted completely had been part of Lorraine's foundation all along. He stared at the signature, heart pounding. This wasn't just about corruption, it was about betrayal, and Jack had one final move left to make. The next morning, Jack didn't wake up angry, woke up hollow. He sat in his kitchen, the scanned voter certification lying on the table, Mitchell's signature plain and clear. 5 years ago, that piece of paper had helped put Lorraine Prescott in charge of the neighborhood. It was the start of everything: the illegal property, seizures, the fake citations, the intimidation, all of it traced back to that single, certified lie. And the man who signed it? Jack's closest ally in the fight, his college friend. The one who said, "She's trying to steal your home. Let's burn her down." Now he had to wonder, was Mitchell cleaning up Lorraine's mess, or covering up his own? Jack didn't wait for Mitchell to call back. He drove to his office downtown. The receptionist hesitated when she saw him. "He's in a meeting." Jack didn't stop. He pushed through the frosted glass doors into the conference room, where Mitchell was alone at the table, sorting documents. Mitchell didn't look surprised, just tired. "You saw it," he said. "Without standing?" "I saw it," Jack replied, "and I need to hear it from you." Mitchell nodded slowly. 5 years ago, Lorraine came to me with a deal. Said the current board was weak. They didn't enforce rules. She wanted change. I believed her. I certified the vote because I thought it would help the community. "You helped her take over," Jack said flatly. "I didn't know what she'd become." Jack laughed bitterly. "She didn't become anything, Mitchell. She was always this way. You just didn't care enough to look." Mitchell looked up now, his voice low. "You think this hasn't been eating me alive? You think I wanted this? My aunt's reputation is ruined. My license is under review. I didn't take a dime from her. I tried to fix it by helping you." Jack stared at him. "You helped me because you were scared, not because it was right." There was a long silence between them, not angry, just final. "I turned in your name," Jack said. "You'll be contacted by the investigators." "I didn't hide the document." Mitchell nodded once. "I wouldn't expect you to." Jack walked out without another word. Back in the neighborhood, things were changing fast. Lorraine had been formally charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Her frozen assets included the house she'd lived in for 12 years, ironically seized under the very bylaw she abused. The board was dissolved. An interim committee was formed, this time overseen by county officials. The neighborhood was quiet for the first time in weeks. Elliot was offered a seat on the new board, but declined. "I've had enough HOA politics for a lifetime," he told Jack. Mrs. Harper's old house returned to her name. She moved back in with her son and cried when neighbors showed up with housewarming gifts. Jack's home was finally safe. No notices, no citations, no shady patrols at night. Still, he couldn't sleep, not because of Lorraine anymore, but because of what she'd left behind. He thought back to all the people who let her rise, the silent board members, the neighbors who looked away, even himself, when he ignored warning signs. The truth was, Lorraine didn't steal power, it was handed to her, but now it was over. Jack stood on his porch one quiet evening, sipping coffee as the sun dropped low behind the trees. Harold walked by, waved and called out. "They're holding a community barbecue next weekend. First one since the pandemic. You coming?" Jack smiled faintly. "I'll be there. Might even bring the grill." As Harold strolled off, Jack looked around at the neighborhood, hedges trimmed, flags fluttering, kids playing in driveways again. It wasn't perfect, but it was finally his again. No notices on the door, no cameras watching his windows, no signatures hiding snakes in the grass. He pulled the old notice from his drawer, the bright orange one Lorraine had stapled to his door weeks ago, and burned it in the fire pit. Justice hadn't come all at once, but it had come. Because sometimes, all it takes to stop the wrong person from taking everything is the right person refusing to back down.